all about what are we learning from one another? What is God revealing as God is showing us the way? How can we teach one another? How can we learn from one another? So we want to keep that going. This is just one more step along the way.
You need to know that what you have in your hands is actually not a full portion of what's been done. We have a whole report coming out around Christian higher education as well. So, and in terms of how that has affected the faith development of young people also. That's not included in what you have here, but that will be coming in time. So there's so much more than even what you're seeing here, which is so great. Rick, thank you so much for what you've done for us. And why don't you go ahead and kind of walk us through some of the big picture of your research.
At the start of this presentation, I want to introduce you to a psychologist named Erik Erikson. And I want to say right at the beginning that this is kind of a strange thing for me to do as an evangelical, because we're talking about spiritual matters, right? Why do we have to talk about a psychologist? Do I agree with everything Erik Erikson says? No, I don't. But psychologists don't agree with everything that Erik Erikson says. But I do think that when God gives people particular insight into human nature and the ways groups and even church groups work, that we should see what we can learn from them. Erik Erikson is known for his 8-stage theory of psychosocial development. And what you need to know is that each stage is epigenetic, which means that it's like a video game, that you have to level up, and you can't get to level 4 until you've gone through level 3. And at each level you gain a virtue. It's like the coins, right, in a video game. And this virtue is a strength that allows you to go on to the next level. And what we want to look at today particularly is level 5. Level 5 is the identity versus role confusion stage, and what you need to know is that there are 3 things that go together. These 3 things are identity, the capacity to make commitments, and adulthood. Put another way, becoming an adult is what happens when an adult's identity is formed and you gain the capacity to make commitments. And this is going to be important for us because one of the enduring commitments that young adults can make is a faith commitment. And if we are interested in the spiritual formation of young adults, we are interested in what allows them to make a faith commitment or what gets in their way of making a faith commitment. Here's another thing that you need to know about Erikson's theory. And look at the slide behind me. I have these different stages set up as a set of steps. And right in the middle, I put this red circle, and in the middle of the circle, I put the words emerging adulthood. What is emerging adulthood? Emerging adulthood is a term that Jeffrey Arnett coined. Arnett was building on Erikson, and Erikson noticed that people did not just smartly step through the development stages. He noticed that people were getting stuck, if you will, between stages 4 and 5, and he called this stuck place a moratorium, a pause, a break in psychosocial development. And so we're leading up to stage 5, where people are going to form their identities. That's right there at stage 5, where people are going to form their identities, and Erikson said that a career choice was the biggest plank in their identity formation. And he said that as technology has grown more complex, and not just technology, but the ideas of society as well, as these have grown more complex and changed at a rapid pace, it has gotten harder and harder for people to target a career. Right? The technology is moving, and I'm targeting a technological career, and it's there, and I'm aiming at it. And as the technology meant that the people needed more education, and as they were getting that education, they would delay their career targeting, and they would delay their identity formation. Now here's an interesting thing that a number of our ministry experts observed as we talked to them, that once people start to put their identity planks in place, they put one big one in place, they seem to put them all in place in short order. This means that if we're concerned about religious identity formation, there is a timing issue here. Somehow, a religious community needs to be there as a candidate for identity formation at the time that young adults are making their identity choices. Now here's another really important thing that Erikson said. This is the last big idea from Erikson. He said that when you form an identity is formed when you negotiate a role in a community. You go to your workplace and you negotiate a role as an engineer. That's one facet of your identity. But if you're going to form a religious identity, Erickson says you need a religious community to negotiate a role in. Or another way, you need a religious community to form an identity with. This is a big insight that identity formation is something that you do with groups. It is not something that you do alone. Here's what this means for timing. You as a young adult form that identity as an engineer. You gain the capacity to make this one major life commitment. And this capacity is like a skill, but it is also what Erickson calls this psychosocial virtue. He called that virtue fidelity. And if I return to the video game metaphor, this is the key that unlocks all kinds of things that lets me level up in all kinds of places in my life. Now you are ready to make other adult commitments. Is there a religious community that is present in your life as a candidate community for you to negotiate that role in? Now it could go the other way, right? Career doesn't always have to come first. But we have done something in our society where we have put career as the preeminent choice that people are going to make in their lives. A religious choice could come first. But the important takeaway here is that when the choices start to be made, when the roles start to be negotiated, it's at that time that there needs to be a religious community, a Christian community, that is present in the life of young adults if they're going to negotiate a Christian identity. Now, the hair might be standing up on the back of your necks for some of you because we don't come to God with a strong bargaining position, right, to negotiate an identity, right? We don't have leverage over God, and that's true. There is a tension that comes along with using Erickson as a model here. And even when we're talking about Christian communities, when we can't reduce the church to a mere community. But what I'm asking you to do today is to kind of hold that intention to see what we can learn from Erickson. So let's just recap before we move on. Moving into adulthood means that you have attained the capacity to negotiate and make adult commitments. Identity is about negotiating roles in communities. It is about committing to communities. It is about taking responsibility within and for those communities. Now, adulthood is delayed, and that is one of the things that emerging adulthood teaches us. Statistics Canada has been measuring adulthood in a number of ways. The first is age at first marriage. Age at first marriage is delayed from about age 23 in 1971 to about age 30 in 2008 when Stats Can stopped tracking this. And by the way, the percent of young adults in any kind of conjugal relationship is in decline, not just marriage. In 1986, only 15% of 25 to 34-year-olds had a university degree. It may be surprising, we probably thought that was much higher. In 2016, 35% did. Over the same period, those with a high school or less for education fell from 28% of the 25 to 34-year-old population to just 9%. The average age at first birth for Canadian women has risen from 23.5 in the mid-1960s to 28.5 in 2011. And this is just for women who gave birth. This is not a general measure of fertility. In 1981, only 42% of 20 to 24-year-olds lived at home. Now it's 63%. For those that are aged 25 to 29, the number has risen from 11% to 29%. Respectively. Full-time work now is harder to get, and this is a capacity issue for young adults because they need that full-time work in order to make those kinds of adult commitments. Any way you look at it, young adulthood is delayed by about 5 to 7 years over the past few decades. Moving into adulthood is a capacity issue as much as it is an issue of the will, and young adults are lacking these things that give them the capacity to move into adulthood. They're lacking the education that allows them to move into the workforce. They're lacking the consistent full-time work that would allow them to move out of their parents' houses. Now, these adulthood markers are also differentiation markers. Differentiation is the process of setting out identity markers between you and your family of origin. So these might be, this is my place. That's my parents' place. This is my job that allows me to be something other than just my parents' child. I'm married now. This is my family. I'm a father now, not just a son. And so you need to be able to differentiate yourself from your family of origin if you were to become your own person, if you're to form an adult identity. Now, just because I don't have the capacity to achieve these things now does not mean that I don't have a need to be my own person. And what we realized when we did these interviews is that some young adults, especially where their parents are devout, in the absence of the capacity to differentiate themselves from their parents in other ways, some young adults are differentiating themselves from their parents by rejecting their parents' religion. It's like this: my parents are Baptists. My parents' religion is really deep and an important part of who they are. That's perfect. This is how I can make a clear distinction between me and my parents, and what is more, this is in my capacity to do so. Emerging adulthood changes the differentiation options that are available to young adults, and this is a big deal for faith formation. Young adults, however, as a group, are conflict averse. When they reject their parents' faith, they generally don't go looking for a big fight about religion. They look for opportunities to withdraw quietly. So it could be something like, I have a part-time job now that is on Sundays. There's an opportunity to withdraw. I have a sports team that travels to tournaments on the weekends. I can withdraw. I'm at university now and I'm busy. I can withdraw. You said going to church was my decision now. I'm not going. You see, I'm not going is not as bold and an in-your-face rejection of religion as, I don't agree with you and I'm leaving the Christian faith. What do you think about that? 1/4 of young adults said their fathers don't understand their real religious views. We did ask about mothers as well, but the numbers were similar. Almost half of those who changed their teenage religious affiliation between once they got to be young adults said the same thing. So it goes up. In fact, in situations where the potential for religious conflict goes up, young adults are more likely to say that their fathers or mothers don't understand what they really believe. But they're not fighting about it. Let's recap. Young adults lack the capacity for traditional differentiation markers. Some differentiate by rejecting their parents' religion, but they tend to find occasions to do so and non-confrontational ways to do it. Differentiation is a necessary precursor to adult identity formation. If a young adult differentiates by rejecting their parents' religion, then Christianity is off the table for when a young adult gains the capacity to make adult commitments, to negotiate adult roles, and to form an adult identity. So here's what we want to do. We want to do what we can to help young adults have the capacity to negotiate adult roles while Christian communities are present. Let's unpack this. We do not want Christianity to be an attractive target for differentiation. We want to make sure that there are Christian communities present in their lives at all stages, wherever they find themselves. And we want to help young adults gain the capacity to negotiate adult roles and to achieve the capacity to make commitments. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to start by looking at the roles of mentors, youth groups, and Christian camps. And then we're going to look at what I call next Christian communities. What do I mean by next Christian communities? Next Christian communities, these are the communities that they will join after they leave their home churches and their parents' homes. These are the Christian campus groups. These are the next churches. So let's start with mentors, youth groups, and Christian camps. And I want to do that by introducing you to Joanna. Joanna grew up in a loving, devout Christian family. This was a in the church whenever the doors are open kind of family. Joanna did not describe her childhood, either in the home or in the church, as unpleasant. But she eventually did leave the church, and you can read more about that in the report. But what she really didn't like about her church is that she was, as she said, I was always my last name and never my first. What did she mean? She meant this, that she was always Hank's girl. I'm making these names up, okay? She was always Hank's girl. She was never a part of the church, the adult church in her own right. She never had an adult role. Years later, she was still the Smith girl. We love our kids. And they have a place in our churches, and most of us are doing really good children's ministry. Those kids, however, have to renegotiate their childhood roles. If they are 19 years old and still have childhood roles in our church, and they cannot negotiate adult ones, they're gone. Now, mentors, youth groups, and Christian camps all help young adults renegotiate their roles within the church. I'll talk about mentors more in a second, but I just want to say this about youth groups and Christian camps. Youth groups and Christian camps are alongside the church. They are a part of the church, but they are generally places where my parents are not. They are generally places that I have chosen to be. They are generally places where I find my place. They are generally places where I negotiate my own role. And this is enormously important. If I have a role in a church through a youth group or through a Christian camp, if I have a Christian identity through a youth group or a Christian camp, then that is part of my identity that I worked out without my mom and dad. Christianity is now my thing. It is not just my mom and dad's thing. Think of it like this. Kids want their own stuff, right? If I'm going camping and I need a sleeping bag and dad says, oh, you can use mine, you say, no, I want my own. And then you go down to Canadian Tire and you probably buy the same sleeping bag that your dad just offered you. But it's different, isn't it? Because it's mine and I chose it. Youth groups are doing so much that is right, except when they stop. I want to talk about continuity. If you read Powell and Clark and other youth ministry gurus, they will all be down on program and programmatic ministry. And there's a lot to say about this, but I want to focus on the fact that they stop. The kids age out. You make youth group a great place, and then when they come to the end of their high school years, you say to them, you can't be here anymore. And they say, well, yes, but this is my connection to your church. And you say, you're too old, I'm sorry. And you say, but I don't belong with the adults, and you don't have a college and careers group, and even if you did have a college and careers group, I have nothing in common with them. You say, I'm sorry, you're out of high school, you're done. And they say, okay, bye then. What is my way in as a young adult? What is my way into the bigger church? We're going to concentrate on four things. The four things are that mentors call out what God has placed inside. Mentors are reintroducers. Mentors are negotiation advisors. And mentors are continuity. Those are the four things that we're going to look at. First point, mentors call out what is inside. When we talk to young adults, there's this weird way that they talk about their future. They say things like this, and I want you to try and listen to it as if it was strange, right? They would say, I don't know what I want to be. Or, I don't know what I want to do. Think about that. Or they say, I don't know what I'm good at. Right? What they're saying is, I don't know myself. If we use Erickson and the idea that identity is about negotiating roles in communities, what they might be saying is this: I don't know where I am going to be able to successfully negotiate a role. They might be saying that my present self doesn't know my future self, but they might be saying is, I don't know if I'm going to be able to take what I am good at and negotiate a role with that in your community. Mentors help to identify what young adults are good at. They come alongside young adults and they say, God has given you this gifting. That's not just information to them. They probably knew that. This is someone else noticed. And that in of itself means that others might notice and give me a chance to negotiate a role with that skill or gifting. In our interviews, young adults would say something like, I didn't know what I was good at. And then later on in the interview, they would say something like, a teacher noticed that I was good at explaining things. And I tell you, that new teacher was born. Almost every time when somebody said that somebody noticed I was good at this, have you considered a career in it? Almost invariably, their life course was set. Almost invariably, their life course was set. This leads to point number 2. Mentors reintroduce young adults to the adult Christian community. Do you remember Joanna? Joanna was always her last name, and her last name, which was her father's name, never her own. Nobody reintroduced her. So she was always role-wise a little girl in that congregation. An introduction, a reintroduction, is so simple and yet so profound. The mentor reintroduces the young adult to the church community, and in doing so, shapes how they understand that person. Have you noticed Joanna? She has a talent for it. Joanna has really shown leadership in. I think we should be thinking about Joanna for that role. Let's go see what Joanna thinks about this. She has a good eye for it. The introduction creates a space at the negotiating table. The mentor is an adult insider that creates a way in. The mentor throws his standing behind her in the community. The mentor creates an opportunity for a successful negotiation of an adult role. So mentors call it giftings, mentors reintroduce, and mentors are negotiation advisors. On a certain level, young adults have to do their own negotiating, right? Mentors can help secure a seat at the table. They can help establish an opening bargaining position by how they introduce you. But the mentor needs to get in there and the young adult needs to get in there and do the bargaining. But it doesn't always go well. Who here has ever gotten beat up in the church? Anybody besides me? Who there had a mentor who could help them process what happened, reframe it for them, and help them get back in there? That is part of mentoring. Good. I'm glad that one person had that mentor. We've got some work to do. It is a lot of conversation. It is support. And it is something that mentors do. So we have 4 points, right? They do calling, they do reintroducing, they do negotiation advisors. Now I want to talk about continuity. This continuity piece is going to lead into the next section of what I'm going to say. Do you remember that the problem with programs is not that we're doing a terrible job with programs, it's that they end. And then you have to start, when you're in this program, you're in this youth group, you've negotiated identity, now you have to start all over again, breaking into a new community. And mentors, when mentoring is done best, mentors are in it for the long haul. Programs come and go, but mentors are forever, right? They're like diamonds. You've been longing for some stats, so I'm going to do some stats here. We're almost going to get there. 43% of young adults said that they had a home church mentor whom they looked up to in high school. That's really good. Of this 43%, 61% said that they were still in contact with mentors. And this idea of still being in contact is really significant. We had different measures for religious persistence on our surveys, such as religious service attendance and whether young adults who went on to post-secondary education connected with a Christian campus group. So this next set of stats, and this is just for those that went on to post-secondary education, we're looking at whether they connected to a Christian campus group, okay? So those that had a home church mentor, that's this first group here, those that had a home church mentor and are still in contact with the mentor, 57% of those went on to connect with a Christian campus group. Now, if they had a mentor, but they are no longer in regular contact, so that mentor was only there for when they were at their home church, only 35% connected with their home church mentor. If they did not have a home church mentor, only 13% of them went on to connect with a Christian campus group. Now, clearly there is a difference both to having a home church mentor and for not having a mentor. And there's a difference between having a mentor and having one that continues on in your life. Now, we talked about We talked to ministry workers, though, about mentoring, and they told us about barriers to mentoring. Some of the barriers were mentoring is intimidating for prospective mentors. And 59% of ministry workers said that it is a hard thing for them to find mentors. And 55% agreed that they have a difficult time to find time themselves to mentor the young adults who are referred to them. See, there's lots of stats in this report, and you can explore some of those. We've talked about the role of a mentor in making reintroductions. We've talked about to the church community. Now I want to talk about the power of a church community making introductions to next Christian communities. If you ask people why they didn't go to church, you will often hear them say something like, I'm not going there, I don't know anybody there. By the way, this isn't just for young adults, right? I think a lot of us, if we face a new church, it is a barrier to us not to know anybody there, right? If you're a youth group leader, you'll also know that young adults will go where their friends are, right? We know that it is difficult to break into a group where you're a stranger. And so we asked ministry experts who was responsible for making connections for young adults with either campus groups or new churches. And about 80% of ministry workers said that the young adults themselves were responsible for making the connections. The numbers were similar for churches and for campus groups. Just at the same time, we're just looking at campus groups. Now, they said that other people share those responsibilities, but about 4 in 5 think that young adults have the responsibility themselves for making those connections. When we surveyed young adults, however, about 4 times as many young adults connected with the Christian campus group when somebody from their home church tried to initiate that connection for them. 66% of those who had someone from their home church try to make a connection for them with the Christian campus group went on to make that connection versus 16% of those who did not. Now there is like a whole lot more that is going on in the background. If you're probably better integrated into your church if somebody is making a connection for you with the Christian campus group, right? That is probably a sign that you have been in a healthy church community. But it backs the question up to what kinds of churches go out of their way to make a connection for young adults. But it does make a huge difference if somebody puts their weight and their time and their effort into breaking through that barrier to all groups and helps you get in. By the way, when a local church tries to make a connection to a Christian campus group and the young adult had a home church mentor, and that home church mentor is still involved in their lives, 79% of those young adults connected to a Christian campus group. So an introduction is key. Let's talk about timing. Again, these numbers are really similar for connecting with a local church or connecting with a Christian campus group. We're going to just continue to talk about Christian campus groups. We asked those who connected to a Christian campus group, how long was it after you started college or university before you connected with a Christian campus group? This is what we found. About 3/4, these two blue things, this is within the first 2 weeks, this is within the first 4 weeks. About 3/4 of those who connected with a Christian campus group did so within the first month. If you were going to connect with a Christian campus group, about 3/4 of those did that in the first month. Think about that. Your young people go off to university, they're not in your church, they're in another city. The candidate Christian communities are a new church or Christian campus group. This first month is critical. Think about your own experience. Hands up if you met the people that you hung out all the way through university in the first month. How many? Me too. I met my friends that I hung out for all of university in Frosh Week, and I just happened to stumble upon an intervarsity group at the University of Waterloo, and that connection and those people changed my life. Those are four weeks, and that is something practical to work with. Let's recap. Identity formation happens when you negotiate a role in a Christian community, or in a community. Identity formation is now delayed. We need We need Christian communities to be present in young adults' lives when they are gaining the Ericksonian virtue of fidelity, which is the capacity to make commitments. We need them to be present so there are candidate Christian communities in their lives for them to negotiate roles in. Mentors, consistent mentors, are part of the solution, and so are simple, thoughtful connections to next Christian communities. Emerging adulthood delays decisions in part because young adults lack the capacity to make commitments, and now we're going to look at why young adults might want to stay emerging adults, and in the process we're going to talk about how they see religion. So let's start by talking about a triad of fears. FOMO, FNBA, and FOPM. We'll start with FOMO. The fear of missing out. This has different application in different contexts. It is the fear that something better will be coming along and that you will miss out on that better thing if you commit too early. This is why young adults don't commit to events until the last minute, right? They're looking to see if something better than what you have planned is coming along. This is also why they don't choose careers until the last minute. Because what if a better career option comes along and I have sunk all of my resources and commitments into this job? Right? This is why you delay getting married, because you're waiting to see if somebody better is coming along, right? It's the fear of missing out. FNBA, that's the fear of not being amazing. Several ministry experts told us about talented, gifted young adults who would start something and then pull out at the last minute if it looked like they weren't going to nail it. If it looked like they weren't going to be amazing. And I believe they said this was especially true for guys. Finally, there's FOPM. This is the fear of passionless monotony. This is the fear that your job and your life post-university or post-high school will be dull, boring, and socially isolating. One expert that we talked to in the literature talked about something they called a quarter-life crisis, which is what happens when you finish university, you're 1 year into your first job, and you quit because you're disillusioned because life wasn't just supposed to be like this. That's your quarter-life crisis. That's FOPM. The fear of passionless monotony. And if you think about FOMO and FMBA and FOPM, they are all looking forward to adulthood, that time when commitments are made and there is no going back, and they're looking ahead and there is a kind of dread. There was this really interesting way in which young adults talked about adulthood. They called it the real world. And the real world is not a good thing, in case you were wondering. It's like this. On the one side we have emerging adulthood, on the other side we have the real world. In emerging adulthood, people are generally young, beautiful, and healthy. In the real world, people are older, less beautiful, less healthy. I'm in the real world. It helps that I have this hoodie on. In emerging adulthood, creating is easy. In the real world, creating is hard. In emerging adulthood, I'm in control. In the real world, others are in control, like your boss. In the emerging adulthood, it is a socially rich environment, especially if you're in university. In the real world, it's a socially isolating environment. I go in and see those same people at work every single day. And I don't even like some of them. In the emerging adulthood, you have a rich variety of activities. In the real world, it's dull or repetitive activities. In emerging adulthood, networking is easy. In the real world, networking is hard. In emerging adulthood, groups are customized to me. In the real world, you have to fit in with the groups as they present themselves. If I'm here in the emerging adulthood world, and the real world is what's waiting for me, why would I want to leave? Like, really? And by the way, the church is in the real world. Every time they talk about it, the church is in the real world. Consider the life trajectory that we used to work with. We were born into this world of toil and trouble, the result of the fall, but God, through Jesus Christ, saves us from sin, redeeming the world in an act of salvation that culminates in heaven. I call this one bad to good. With emerging adulthood, you start out healthy, beautiful, in control, in a socially rich environment, and then you fall into the real world. I call this one good to bad. In the 3rd century CE, the Persian prophet Manichaeus taught a dualistic cosmology, that there is an ongoing struggle between the good spiritual world of light and the evil material world of darkness. And if you remember your list of enduring and reoccurring heresies, this one is called Manichaeanism. Some cultures and times are more hospitable to one heresy than another. Emerging adulthood presents as spiritual both in the presence and importance of social media, which we call digital instead of spiritual. Digital is the current antonym or opposite for the physical or real world. And you have the digital, spiritual, easy, beautiful, new, versus the physical, slow, hard, real world, old. And this, my friends, is fertile soil for Manichaeanism. But it's not just this. Many of you will be aware of Christian Smith's moralistic therapeutic deism, and I've sort of reproduced his definition up on this slide. What's really interesting about moralistic therapeutic deism is that Christian Smith says that young adults who hold to this experience religion as homogenizing rather than divisive. We found a variation of Christian Smith's MTD. It is the same in that it is experienced as homogenizing and not polarizing. It is the same in that it has a fairly basic morality based on niceness. It is different in that God is not necessary, nor are other religious trappings like heaven. And we call this the universal Gnostic religious ethic, and it kind of goes like this. Behind all religions, there is a deeper shared meaning. All religions share the same goal of helping people to be good human beings. The real-world manifestations of religion are like culture. They are matters of taste, and as such, they are not important. To insist that the real-world trappings of religion are important is to cause division. Now, most of those who hold to this ethic will talk about a moment when they realized that the differences between religions were only apparent. And it is a sudden moment of enlightenment, and in this sense, it is Gnostic. It is Gnostic meaning that you do have a sudden moment of enlightenment, you are let in on a secret. It is also Manichaean in the sense that it is the real-world manifestation of religions, particularly doctrines and traditions, that are bad. The religious ethic which they find behind all religions are metaphysical and spiritual, and that's good. So there's this contest in Uyghur, and it's a terrible acronym. It sounds terrible, like Uyghur, right? Like ogre. But it's what we have right now. It is a contest between the particular manifestations of religion, which are physical and bad, and the metaphysical or ethical manifestations of religion, which are good. The purpose of Uyghur is to help people become good human beings. And if you ask young adults what a good human being is, they will generally point to like 3 of the 10 commandments as the Christian way of getting at the Uyghur ethic, which one person described as don't hurt each other, treat each other with respect, and the way that you would want to be treated. Religion then becomes functional. Religion does not save you or bring you into a relationship with God. It helps fulfill a set of psychosocial functions. Therefore, if you can do it without God, you don't really need God. If you can understand the religious ethic and it helps you to be a good human being without God, that's fine. This means that many young adults, and we're talking about young adults, remember, that were raised in the church, they actually don't talk about Jesus or God, but they will talk about a higher power. And this higher power doesn't intervene in their lives or require anything of them, but they hope that if they find themselves in trouble, that this higher power might intervene positively on their behalf. This has consequences for those of us coming from one of those particular real-world traditions. Commitment, and there's a word that gets grouped in with adulthood, then becomes a bad thing, because commitment is a commitment to a doctrine, to a religion that calls into question the ways in which all religions, if you get behind them, are the same. There is a consequence for differentiation as well. We talked about how some young adults use religion as a way to differentiate themselves from their parents. This is often how they're doing it, right? They're doing it like this. My parents don't understand this, that all religions are the same, but I do. I'm in on a secret. Therefore, I'm part of this new group who have received this knowledge, and my parents aren't part of that group, so I have a relationship with this group. What is more, that there is an intimacy in this new group. What is intimacy? Intimacy is the ability to come into the presence of people without having to get through all kinds of barriers. Right? There's an intimacy that comes from knowing right away, that both of you, that your religious differences ultimately do not matter. And so I can connect with you quickly. Let's be aware of this. Uger is a strategy for dealing with religious difference, and young adults are dealing with far more religious difference than many of us ever did when we were growing up. And in many ways, Uger is a fallback position if you have not been equipped with other strategies for dealing with religious difference. How prevalent is this? Well, it's hard to tell. Some of those who hold to Uger will describe themselves as spiritual nuns. Some will describe themselves as part of a Christian tradition. No matter what label they use, it is this belief that there is a shared religious ethic behind all religions that unites them and creates this sense of community. And for those who hold to this, the mission becomes social harmony through playing down religious difference. I think this is a lot more prevalent than data asking a generic question about whether young adults believe in God or not would suggest. Remember, even when young adults reject their parents' religion, because they've concluded the differences, they don't tend to have a conflict about it, and they likely don't have a conflict about it because they've concluded that religious differences ultimately don't matter. The chief differentiation they have discovered then is the knowledge that religious differences don't matter. And Uger fits with emerging adulthood in that it doesn't ask for commitments. Rather, it says that commitments are problematic. Let's recap. I'm just about done. Identity is formed when a role is negotiated in a community. Adult identity formation is delayed, moving it for most people into their 20s when they have left their home church communities. Delayed adulthood means delayed differentiation, making religion an attractive differentiation marker. Mentors, youth groups, and camps all help young adults negotiate identities within the church apart from the direction of their parents. Mentors, especially, are critical points of continuity, introducing and helping facilitate role development within the church. Connections to next Christian communities are vital for young adults, and these communities themselves are often the Christian communities that young adults will negotiate a Christian identity in when they have gained the capacity to make adult commitments. The trajectory of religious experience has been reversed, providing fertile ground for a new universal Gnostic religious ethic. This is some of what we found. I've tried to focus on the ideas. There's a lot more to read in the report. And now I'd like to call Sid and Chris up. We're going to take some questions.